Hello, and welcome to another one of these fantastic live streams at Nobody Studios. Today, we're spending time with investors at Nobody Studios, people who followed our story from the very beginning, got behind us and supported us, and have helped us on our way to create the business as it is today. It's been super fun to interview and spend time with lots of our early investors to hear their own personal stories of entrepreneurship and businesses that they've been involved in or tried to start. So today, it's actually another pleasure of mine to bring in someone who I've known for a very long time now, who's also been great inspiration, collaborator, and part of the Lean series that we're all really proud that we brought to market, Mr. Josh Seiden. So Josh, how you doing?
Hey, Barry, nice to see you.
Yeah, no, great to see you too. So, your story, even on your own entrepreneurial journey, is fascinating. You're a designer at heart, but you've been so many different things over the course of your career. You've started businesses, you're a multi-time best-selling author. So for many people, when they're sort of like just getting to understand a little bit about you, can you think about what got you started on your entrepreneurial journey, if you will? What was one of the first early moments that really got you excited about designing and building products?
You know what's really interesting, Barry? I was thinking a little bit about this question before we started, and I think people. My first instinct is to think that entrepreneurialism is about starting a business, but and that's true, and I can talk to you about the businesses I've started. But when I think back to like the first really entrepreneurial thing I did, it was when I was working for a company. And it was early in my career. Actually, one of my first jobs was in technical support. I answered an 800 number, it's a young guy.
Me too. Gateway computers.
In fact, I was, okay, wait, I found this picture of me on the tech support desk some years ago, just recently. It's too funny.
Thank you for bringing that. That's amazing.
I didn't even put two and two together. It's been on my desk for a few days. Anyway, we were there, and we did everything on paper. Everything was, people would call us, and we would do repairs for people, and we would process the repairs on a 4-part paper form. And it was ridiculous. We had networked computers on our desk. It was the early 90s, and I proposed to my bosses that we could write a database application that would replace those 4-part paper forms. I'd never done anything like that. I sort of had confidence that I could do it, but I'd never written a piece of serious software, and I proposed to my bosses that we should do this thing. And I made this proposal, and they said, "Can you do it?" And I said, "Yeah." And I got to spend a year doing this thing. And then this system was in use for like 5 or 6 years before they replaced it with, another system. So having had that success of like seeing the opportunity and, casting forward like, oh, well, we could fill this opportunity with this thing that doesn't exist yet. I then did that a number of times in the course of that job. And I think that was kind of the earliest manifestation of entrepreneurialism for me.
Yeah, and it's so great to hear you share these stories, right? Because many people, as you say, feel like the only path is that you have to sort of quit your job, burn the boats, go for a jog, trip over a stone, and launch a unicorn within 24 hours. And this is not the truth, right? Like businesses want people who show ingenuity, who show interest, and try and bring things to life. And in many cases, like a lot of what the spirit, if you will, of Nobody Studios is about, is to encourage people who have these ideas that they can actually sort of have a place to bring them to life where they might be heard. So, as you said, many companies that I've certainly worked in, and I'm sure many people listening, have been in situations where they've had ideas and they've brought it to the boss and they've just got instantly shut down. Or maybe they were supported and thought, wow, this was great. What a great experience. I wish I could do something like that for myself. And I think we often hear a lot of those sort of either ends of those spectrums and everything in between for many people when they come up with new ideas and thinking about building them.
It's interesting you say that, because I was really young. It was my first real job. I didn't know anything. And I had a boss who kept saying to me, yeah, we're going to let you do this, but never took any action on it. He never activated it. And after months of basically stalling me, I was just like, I don't need this job. And I quit. I came into work and I thought the way you did it was you put a resignation on the desk of your boss. That's what I thought. Right? So I wrote a resignation letter and I put it on his desk, and he came running out when he got to the office. He's like, what is this? And I was like, well, I'm quitting. Like, I want to do this project. You keep saying yes and then not letting me do it. And so I'm going to quit. And so then he runs to his boss. His boss came running down the hall and was like, you can't quit. You have to do this project. I was like, well, let me do the project. And then he was really mad at me. He said, but you can never blackmail me again. And I said, I'm not blackmailing you. I'm quitting.
I love it. So good. It's definitely a forcing function. So fair play. Finding that out in the early days.
I really was quitting. Like, I talked to my wife and, the whole thing.
That's so funny. So for someone like yourself, right? Like, we know each other a number of years, but when you started to hear about Nobody Studios, what were one of some of the things that sort of piqued your curiosity, if you will, and got you to say, hey, you know what, I'll give this a shot. I'll get involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of things, but like, one of them is this idea of putting ideas into action, right? Like, even if you go back to that story, like it was a good proposal, but nothing happened on it until somebody said, yeah, here, go. Right. And, I've had a lot of those experiences in my career of I'm an idea person. I have lots of ideas, but I don't necessarily act on them, and so, over the years, I've had partners who are action-oriented people, right? And they're people who, they just have an idea and they act. And so, like, when I partner with people who are action-oriented, good things happen, And so it's something that I look for is people who are interested in putting ideas into action. And that's something that I saw, at Nobody, right? Is this idea, this kind of this radical, sort of, almost insane vision of like how action oriented the studio wanted to be. And so that was,
yeah, well, this is great to actually hear you share this, even from your own personal point of view, right? Because collaboration is such a key part of building great things. And, for someone, when you even said that about this notion of, pairing yourself with someone who's action oriented, it's funny, whenever I think of getting feedback from something, you're actually one person who generally floats into my mind fairly quickly, because you're actually really good at it. And, many people say they're good at it, but you're actually good at it, and it was funny. I think, even when we were writing Lean Enterprise or writing a lot of stuff, you were one of the first people that even our publisher recommended that we send draft copies of the book to, because you gave very helpful feedback. So it's really interesting to sort of hear you reflect on that a little bit. Like, what do you think has sort of brought that into an innate skill of yours, if you will, like, as opposed to this idea of the balance of action, but also like reflection and feedback?
I don't really, that's an interesting question, but I don't know if you can even answer a question like that. Like, I just sort of feel like everybody's intelligence has a slightly different shape, and everybody has sort of gifts, things they're good at. And then the flip side is they have, like, holes, things they're not great at, and the things that you're really good at just feel easy and natural, I mean, on the feedback, I had this experience. So in the early part of last decade, I ran a product development studio. We had designers, product managers, engineers, and we built new products, right? We did it for brands. We didn't do kind of what Nobody is doing, but companies would come to us and we would build stuff for them. And I walked into a meeting room where one of the teams there was working, and they'd asked me for a little feedback, to your point. And I listened I went to the whiteboard, and I had thoughts about, maybe something they weren't seeing. And I kind of sketched it out. And the designer in the room, like I just thought I was giving them feedback. And the designer in the room went, "Oh my God, wow. How did you see that?" I was like, "What do you mean, how did I see that? Like, I just saw a thing. I didn't think it was miraculous." And he was like, "No, that's a very special thing you just did." And I was like, "No, that was not special. That was just like obvious to everyone in the room." Right. And so, like, he may have thought, "Oh, well, there was something special about what Josh did." I didn't have a sense that I was doing something special. I'm still not sure it was special, but I'm certain that his reaction stuck in my mind, because
Right.
it was one of those situations where, you can recognize that you're good at something without necessarily feeling like it's a superpower, And so I think those things, like, we just have them. And I think, especially if we're good at something, we sort of are. The society tells us, well, you're supposed to be good at all of it. Nobody's good at all of it. Nobody's good at all of it. And so the idea for that business, I had the idea for that business in 2010 with a very good friend of mine, one of the smartest people I know. And she and I talked about opening this business together for a year. And then she called me and she's like, "Yeah, no, I'm moving. I can't start the business." But we'd been talking about starting the business for a year. And then I met my two partners in that business. And I had coffee with this guy. I knew him for 2 weeks. And he said to me, "You want to start a business?" And he described this business that I'd been talking about with my other partner. And I was like, "Yeah, I've been thinking about that." And like, he had articles of incorporation drawn up in a week. Made my head spin. And I was like, "Oh, like, right, this is the action-oriented partner that I need. I don't need more thinking partners. I got the thinking,
It's so fascinating to hear you share this. Even when I think about starting Nobody, right? Like at the end of sort of like 2019, I was sort of like looking for something new. I was missing building. It was a real part of like in the daily grind of like banging your head against the wall and trying to create things. And I'd shared it with a few people, like, my network or whatever. And Lee Tagali is a guy who, worked with me at Agile Craft.
Sure.
And he was like, he rings me up and he goes, "You got to meet Mark McNally." And I'm like, who's Mark? I have no idea who he is. He's like, "Oh, it's just this guy. He's trying to start this thing, a venture studio." And literally, like, I had never met Mark in my life, but we jumped on the call and he started explaining to me this vision for what he was trying to create in the studio, like a place where people could bring all their entrepreneurial skills, get a mix of different people, put all of their energy, their experience into equity, into building these companies. And there was no sort of, we were just going to focus on SaaS products, or we're just going to focus on health products, or it was like everything. And one of the things I always enjoyed about my previous life was experiencing all these multiple domains, right? The curiosity of learning about health and wellness, learning about travel, learning about, and this just sort of felt like the perfect sort of crucible for me to put everything that I'd learned into like one thing. And I'd never met Mark. And then the pandemic kicked in. So we were doing calls at the beginning of 2020, just chatting with one another and introducing other people in the world. And then the pandemic hit. So we didn't actually meet each other in person for like a year and a half. And yet we started this company together, which has been like, super fun. So it's fascinating, again, as you say, like, to recognize, people bring different things to the table. Everyone has their superpowers. Everyone has their gaps, their holes, as you described them. And I think it's the power of bringing all this together is sort of one of the most exciting parts about actually building and creating things together. So it's lovely to hear you sort of share and recognize that in your own sort of story, as well, a little bit of what we're trying to create in the studio at the moment too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the magic of a studio, right? Is that you're intentionally creating a place for that kind of thing to happen, that kind of collaboration, that kind of mixing of ideas and skills and capabilities,
So for someone who's, crazy enough to start investing in a nobody in the very beginning, when I think we were probably a Post-it note and rubbing two sticks together trying to start a fire, like what have been some of your observations over the journey of the last sort of 2 years or year and a half or so that you've been involved as an investor?
Well, I think this is, first of all, I think this is a really hard and audacious thing that you all are doing, and so that that's interesting and engaging and exciting. And so I think it's a really, really smart model. When the studio that I was talking about, that business was called Neo. And we had brought together a number of small shops, design shops, software engineering shops. And we had a hypothesis about it. We were just building a regular services business. We weren't intending to build a venture studio. And at some point we realized that sort of our hypothesis about the business and what we were building and the way we had structured our business, they didn't match. Like, we wanted to do one thing, but we built a business for it. We built a structure for another. And we talked a lot about, sort of pivoting to a venture studio model. But, it's sort of like you buy a motorcycle and then suddenly you realize you need an SUV. Like, you're not just going to take it into the shop and have them convert it. You know what I mean? It was just like, it wasn't there. It had to be built from the ground up, And so we looked a lot at the different models that we might, in thinking, could we pivot? We worked through a number of permutations. And I think one of the permutations looked, similar to what you were doing, although not the same. Like, I think there's some really interesting and unique ideas here. The crowdfunding in particular, I think, is really interesting. And so, but one of the things that really appealed to me about Nobody was that sort of the sort of the action-oriented, evidence-based, working through ideas quickly. And so that's been interesting to see that in action.
Yeah, no, and again, it's been great to have someone like you cheering us on and supporting us. And half the fun of doing this stuff is figuring it out along the way. And it means a lot when people get behind you, support you from the very beginning. And as you say, we are doing something kind of unique. We are doing this crowdfunding where typically venture studios or venture in general is often locked up to people who are high net worth individuals or accredited investors, and anyone literally, regardless of their financial situation, can actually make an investment in Nobody. If you go to republic.com/Nobody Studios, you can actually own a small piece of the studio that we're building at the moment. We're trying to do 100 companies in the next 5 years. It's a pretty audacious goal. We've got 11 going, 4 in the market. It's been a lot of fun building these things. So for anyone, Josh, who's thinking about maybe getting involved in venture, what would be one of your sort of tips or advice for them if they want to get involved and start exploring where they can bring their talent, maybe their influence, or even their capital to bear?
I mean, find people who will activate your ideas, right? I mean, if you're an idea person, I always wanted to do blah, 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 blah. Okay, don't let that be always wanted, right? Make it, find people to activate it. And if you are an activator, if you're somebody who's like really great at putting stuff in the world, find idea people, right? And partner with them. Like, you don't have to go alone. Find the studio.
Well, thank you very much for making time in your morning coffee to come and join us and share all the fun in the fair. Look, it's absolutely amazing to have you as a Nobody from the very beginning, encouraging us, cheering us on, and introducing us to so many great people who've come to the studio to potentially work with us. Josh, I look forward to having you on to the show again to share more fun things that we're doing along the way. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Barry. Great to chat.